Hello, and welcome to another National Speological Society webinar. This is a really great presentation. I am very excited because I've had the pleasure to work with all of these individuals as they've been working with preservation, restoration, and repairs in the Southwest region. So this will be an overview and considerations of all the different initiatives they have been doing over the last several years. So our host for this evening is actually not me. It is going to be Mike Mansur. So he is the chair of the Southwest region. He is also the chair for the Sandia Grotto, and he is the leader and founder of the Cave Formation and Repair Project. How you doing, Mike? Can you unmute yourself?
Doing fine. Thank you, Deborah. Right here. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I want to thank, first of all, Deborah Heyer, the NSS Education Chief, who has asked us to present tonight. And so we're going to be talking about different projects that are within the scope of the Southwest region, but they're also things that folks can take with them back to where they're all from and use the same concepts in their own grottos and other locations. So what we have done is put this together through the National Speological Society. So one thing I wanted to read first off, which is on the front page of the webpage of the National Speological Society, is that its goals are to promote safe and responsible caving practices, effective cave and karst management, speleology, and conservation. So we'll be talking about conservation and preservation of caves and how to go about doing that and what's involved and also sinkhole cleanup and mitigation. And then another piece will be restoration of caves. And finally, the Cave Formation Repair Project and what it's achieved and the different advancements we've made in that. And then I'll do a wrap up at the end, and then we'll have our question and answer period after that. So if you have any questions, please put them on the chat, and so we can start from there. So again, we're going to go in order of the first lead off will be Minori Yoshida. She's the NSS Southwest Region Vice Chair, and she's going to be talking about preservation methods and what's involved with that. So Minori, are you all set?
I'm in the Sandia Grotto in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've been caving for about 7 years. So today I'm actually going to be talking about the Galena King mine. It's technically not a cave, it's a mine, but I want to talk about this just to kind of change it up for you guys, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of stuff about cave conservation and restoration, and I just want to make it a little bit interesting. And I want to show you how cave conservation techniques can be applied to other situations. I want to give special thanks to Matt Thompson for spearheading this project, and thanks to Keith Hodge, Chris Pink, the owners of the Galena King mine, Max and Pat Evans, and the many other people who have been involved in this project. The Galena King mine is located southeast of Albuquerque. And we started visiting this mine in 2014 as spelunkers. Like, we were literally had no idea about helmets and 3 sources of lights and things like that. But, you know, we quickly saw the need for protection and conservation. We saw how beautiful it was and how it was being vandalized. Now, this is just kind of like how I personally see conservation in 2 sort of groups here. We see the administrative portion of it, which is like permits, sort of like the paperwork aspect of it that helps you sort of keep track of what's going on, documenting it, like seeing how many visitors and stuff you're getting. And then there's like the physical aspect of conservation, which is basically like gates and fences, which is sort of like your last resort of like controlling people's movement. I also think of conservation not only keeping people out of caves when they shouldn't be there, but long term, getting people to care about the underground world. So improving safety and improving access can better the visitor experience and their appreciation. Now, when the owner, Max Evans, first bought the mine in 1963, he knew it wasn't economically viable. He bought it for the sheer beauty of it. Max described what it looked like when he first bought it, and he described it as walking to a giant geode. The original miners left behind huge walls of fluorite, galena, and barite crystals unbroken. They intentionally worked around some areas to keep them intact. Galena King also has a really fascinating and rich history. It was first opened in 1907 which predates New Mexico's statehood, and the patent was issued by President Warren Harding in 1922. There's lots of archaeological remains of the cabin and workshops all over the property. And some of the stuff may not be as old as some of the things you see in a lot of other caves, but still interesting nonetheless. And there's also a lot of neat stories about like the previous owners, geologists, surveyors, and other visitors of the mine. This is kind of like the real reason I really got involved in this project. Decades of trespassers have been illegally and destructively collecting minerals from the Galena King. We found items being sold on eBay, Etsy, various online mineral vendors, and local rock and mineral shows. Not only is this type of collecting unethical and unsustainable, but it ruins the beauty that was intentionally left behind from early miners, and the reason Max Evans bought the mine. The photo in the upper right here with the ruler, the dark crystals, the dark areas shows the undisturbed fluorite, and then the white and light blue shows where the crystals are smashed in an attempt to remove them. Fluorite is very brittle, and it was pretty unlikely that anybody was able to get any large pieces out. Rock collectors are also known to destroy anything that they're unable to take out themselves in order to keep other people from getting it. A motto that we found on a collector's blog site says, "Take only minerals, leave only craters." The owner of the Galena King mine, Max Evans, is a famous New Mexico author and one of the founders of the New Mexico film industry. He needed help getting the mine to meet various state regulations so that he can sell the property. And we agreed to volunteer to help out with this because we apparently had nothing else going on with our lives. He provided all the materials needed for the fencing, gating, and the safety improvements to the mine. And we gave regular updates and trip reports to him. Max Evans unfortunately passed away in 2020, but we continued to work closely with his wife, Pat. And in this group photo in the bottom here, Max is the guy in the black vest, and the people holding the frame photos are actual descendants of the original owners from the Bateman family. Access to the mine has been like the most logistically challenging aspect of this project. We've worked closely with the Kirtland Air Force Base and Isleta Pueblo to seek permission to cross their property. And forming a good relation with both of these entities has helped increase surveillance from both sides, and illegal activity from trespassers and rock collectors who seem to have ceased. The group Friends of Galena King formed in 2014 because we wanted to protect this mine. Our intentions were to basically get the two entrances and fence up the shaft on top, and to help promote the mine by leading trips to get this property sold. And we thought this project would only take a few months at first, but it's in year 7 right now and counting. We became a nonprofit organization in 2016 when we realized the scope of this project was a lot larger and it would be a lot longer term. Right now, we are become stewards of the mine and advocate for the owners. And this work was accomplished, with our group, our family, friends, coworkers, and a lot of new friends that we've made along the way. In an effort to find future owners for the Galena King mine, we approached a lot of different universities, local universities and schools. UNM owns a mine in northern Mexico, which it uses for educational purposes. And we were hoping that the Galena King mine would be maybe another one of these properties that the university could have and the students could use. So one of the first field trips out to the Galena King mine was a geology class, and a caver named Dave Decker asked if he could tell his grotto about it. And we were like, yeah, sure. Wait, what's a grotto? Oh, it's like it's a cave club. Like, cave club? There's caves? What? And so basically that's how we discovered the caving community, and this is how I got into caving. And the ethics of the cavers and the conservation mindset really clicked with our project. We get along really well with them. Also, their SRT and survey skills became a really important part of the project. The Kirtland Air Force historians and archaeologists and the Isla Pueblos Environmental and Cultural Resources Department have also become involved over the years. The next several slides, I'm just going to show you kind of like what of the work that has been done over the years. We spent almost every weekend for about a year, along with our friends, families, coworkers, and other volunteers that we'd find. Whenever we'd have a field trip with the university or other groups, we'd have them just sort of take a bucket or a piece of wood or a tool and some water and things like that up the mountain to help us out. The top left photo here shows what one of the entrances was, and it was a belly crawl about 17 inches tall. And when we finished digging it all out, when we got it ready to pour the concrete footers to install a gate, the entrance was 7 feet tall. Over a ton of concrete was needed for each entrance. Some friends of ours with ATVs helped out a lot by getting a lot of this material up the hill, concrete, water, tools, and things like that. But everything that was needed for the upper entrance had to be brought up by hand. This includes the gate. You can see this on the upper right photo. Super heavy, super steep hill. And barbed wire was used to fence an open shaft. The shaft does not connect to the rest of the mine. Later exploration, Torn Relief found that there were no animal or human remains at the bottom. And this tall ladder allows safe access to a section of the mine where it was inaccessible to the rock collectors, and a beautiful nest of barite still remains. It's also a really nice view of the inner workings of the mine and helps visitors appreciate how hard the work must have been back then, with little safety measures and by working with carbide or kerosene light only. This bridge allows for safer crossing to a section of the mine where there are some really cool historic carbide signatures. Middle photo here shows what it used to be like, crossing across some ore tracks and some random pieces of aluminum. And the photo on the right here shows a much safer way to do it. And we placed some 2x4s, some flimsy 2x4s covering this open winze. And we put in some more robust 4x4 covering a winze. This is a kind of a special, unique aspect about this one that you might not see in cave conservation, but to make it safer for visitors. This area of the mine has a lot of, or not a lot, but a few unexploded ordnance, also known as Uxos, because of its location next to the military base. This area was used as the proving grounds during World War II to test the proximity fuse. It was an important innovation that helped win the war, and tens of thousands of these rounds were fired into the hills. Most have been recovered, but on occasion, we do find a couple. As far as restoration, we just did a lot of trash removal. We took about 7 bags with the trash from inside and outside of the mine left behind by vandals and rock collectors. And during all this, we also remapped the entire mine using traditional cave survey techniques. The original survey is over to the left. And although it's very simplified and almost 100 years old, it's surprisingly accurate. The image to the right is just a small section of the winze that connects the upper 2 levels there. Here we see a completed map by Todd Roberts on the lower left here. And we get some detail of the inner workings with using some built-in LiDAR from a newer version of an iPad. And drone survey has helped align some historic surveys to current ones and to accurately locate property boundaries. Now, before Max Evans died, his vision for the Galena King actually changed dramatically. Instead of just wanting to sell it to the next seller, when you saw when you saw the trip reports of the students from UNM in Mexico Tech and how they were mesmerized with the minerals and having so much fun on the field trips, he wanted to make sure that they had continued access to the mine. So now the Friends of Galena King group mostly does educational and outreach trips. So in addition to this list you see here, we've taken up our friends, families, coworkers, friends of the owners. And so far, everyone has agreed that it's a beautiful and special underground space worthy of our efforts to protect it. You know, a great way to build landowner and neighbor relationships is to get them involved. Let them know what's going on and to keep them updated constantly. And when it comes to volunteer effort, a good way to find volunteers is to trick your friends to go check out something cool and then make them hike up the mountain with a bunch of water and cement up a mountain. We've also learned a lot from our experience, and we now know how to make each trip more successful than the last. For example, now we make sure that everybody has proper footwear and has adequate amount of water. And most importantly, we've learned that conservation means getting people involved. You need to teach them that there is an amazing world underneath the surface, and participation makes them feel a direct connection and personal responsibility. So I'll just say thank you. This is just a small sample of all the people who have come up and visited and volunteer, and none of this would have been possible without volunteers.
Thank you, Minori.
Yep.
Excellent presentation. And you folks can see that you could apply a lot of these methods of gate building and other preservations to caves throughout the country. So we appreciate that. And Michael, if you're ready, Michael Moffitt is the NSS Southwest Region Secretary, and also a former Vice Chair of the Pecos Valley Grotto. He's going to be speaking about sinkhole cleanups and associated environmental issues. So you all set?
Can you all hear me?
Yep. Very good, thanks.
All right, so what I'm going to cover today is Southeast New Mexico caves and karst, more specifically the Sacrament Gypsum plains. And eventually we're hoping to expand this to other areas. As you can see, the Sasquatch looking guy in the picture is myself going through a passage in one of the gypsum caves in the region that we cover.
Michael, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Yep, there we go. Can you guys hear me again? Sorry, it must have gone out. So part of our main focus is going to be the Sacrament Gypsum plains. And one of the projects that was our brainchild that we developed over time was in partnership with BLN, more specifically, and thanks to Newt Peterson, and also Deborah with Nickery, who is on here now. And so a lot of these discussions and pre-work kind of led up to what we started. And so we came up with the term SCRP, which is the Sinkhole Cave and Karst Remediation Project. So remediation is a term that is used in environmental agencies to restore by reversing or stopping environmental damage. I'm a project manager here in the Permian Basin, and this is kind of what my daily job entails. And so it was a nice transition into what is my passion and my hobby, which is caving. So the goals of the project, one of the main areas that we wanted to identify was sinkholes that have been used for waste disposal. When you get into rural areas in New Mexico, there's a lot of issues when it comes to ranchers out here for vast swaths of area that might not have access to landfills or easy places to take their refuse. And so over time, there tends to be a gravitation towards throwing their trash into something that's already like a landfill, which is a sinkhole. It's very convenient. And so we kind of seen that across other places in the country. I know a lot of other states have had this same issue. And so that was our primary focus. Another was to partner up with land managers and recruit volunteers. From there, after we kind of laid the foundation of it, the BLM went ahead and they applied for NEPA funding. So that is the National Environmental Policy Act. And through that, we were able to get funding and execute these cleanups. Next step is build a rapport with the locals and ranchers to help prevent future dumping. That's one of the most complex ones. That segues into coming up with solutions at no cost to landowners to make waste removal in remote areas convenient and economic. And that's part of where the NEPA funding comes in hand. And then finally, public outreach on how groundwater contamination can occur through improper waste disposal. Part of that is we want to use the term education sometimes when it comes to landowners that are in those areas who've sometimes had generational families there for over 100 years. It's best to take a more nuanced approach to that public outreach. It takes time to build up that rapport. And so we want to make sure that we don't feel like we are talking down to them, but rather partnering up with them for a greater cause. With that, NICRI came up with a pamphlet, just kind of as a general format to approach. And as you can see, it's in 3 slides here, or rather panels, and it's folded up. And so this was kind of in partnership with the International Year of Cave and Karst. And so Deborah had come up with this and went through the proper channels. So we had some literature to produce. A lot of what it covered was how sinkholes affect recharge and discharge areas and why we want to keep it clean and why this is important. Again, these areas are large and cover sometimes 6,000 to 1,000 acres and beyond. And so with the cattle operations that are out there, what do cattle require? Just like humans, they require water, and they're getting it from the same source. And so when you have sinkholes that are getting refuse in them, there can be a litany of trash that has maybe potentially toxic nature to it, or is finding its way to the water table, which I'll get into here soon. With the geologic map. This is the geo map of New Mexico, courtesy USGS. And as you can see, this blue area right here is one of the primary areas of focus. It goes all the way from Torrance County and Guadalupe County, New Mexico, all the way to the border within some parts of Lee County and mostly Eddy County. So again, that is a very large area. If you were to compare it to some of the states that are up in the Northeast, it would be comparable in size to likely like Delaware. So again, lots of ground to cover. Where you see my mouse right here, if you can see it, is mostly north of Roswell or northwest. And so that was where we kind of started everything. And it's in the San Andreas Formation. There is a lot of caves that are gypsum and anhydrite, but there are also dolines and limestone, like the Grayberg limestone that exists out there. So moving into sinkhole recon trips. So in order to gather the data for the NEPA funding, it was requested that we did recon. And recon is an important part of it because just like any type of environmental project, you have to characterize a site. Because every site is different and there's nuance to it, we started with a Google form or Google Doc form. And from there, we decided to also get GPS embedded pictures. A lot of the initial recon before we got out there was based on prior trips, but also based on Google Earth imagery. With the imagery that's available nowadays, it's pretty incredible what you can find and notice from above. Something like the sinkhole that is pictured in the left and also in the right is that you'll see how much trash is in that hole. And why that's a primary concern, as you can see, is it covers anything from household waste to ranching waste. You could have sheep lie in there, which they use when they are treating the coats for the sheep and is a chemical, or you could even potentially have something like asbestos from insulation and walls. In fact, this particular location we found another ranch in the area where a building was present in one time frame when we scale back the time window on Google Earth. And then next thing we know, it wasn't present in, 5 years later. So it's kind of like a least moves principle there on what we're trying to identify. And again, it could include all sorts of different ways, from box spring mattresses to refrigerators and household appliances. So every single site that we had, we tried our best to categorize the type of waste that was in it. So when it came time to clean up, we knew what we were getting into. Some of these might even supersede a regular volunteer cleanup and might require some specialty services that would be provided. A site like this, if volunteers try to remove all the trash by hand, it would probably take a very long time. And sadly, this is a site that more or less mimics an actual landfill and would require something like a backhoe or yellow iron or heavy equipment in general to remove. Entrances, another primary focus. As you can see with the name of the project, when we have sinkhole, caves, and karst. Well, sinkholes can be caves or karst. In this instance right here, these are actual cave entrances. And you can see the amount of trash that poured into this one. This was actually the site that was chosen for our first project. If you look into the left of that, that's an entrance to a rather large system. I believe there's over a half a mile of passage, and there's at least several entrances that are known. It was mapped, I believe, in the late 80s or early 90s and had been known as the Sparks Trash Pit by locals. And so that was some of the general info that we had going into it. This was on one side of the hill, and the image on the right corner where my mouse is was on the other side. In fact, there was 3 other pits that are on the other side of the hill. And so again, when it comes to karst in the gypsum plains, water can move through these very fast. So it's very easy in general for that to infiltrate a system. A lot of the depth of these caves can actually vary from anywhere from 50 feet to just being horizontal passage to actually one of the deepest gypsum caves in the country at 480 feet. That's a long way for water to travel, and all the biomes that are associated with that can be affected by it. And so if you throw an old motor oil bottle into a cave or a gas canister and it gets punctured, all that is percolating its way down through the system. So obviously these are important to us for us to want to remediate them. So when we initially did it, we went to the Southwest Regional that we had, and we did it in the Sacramento Gypsum Plains. And it helped provide us a good volunteer pool to draw from. And so I have up here teamwork plus a good winch for the win. It's amazing what you can accomplish with a winch. And so when we started the process of actually removing the trash, obviously we run through a whole litany of scenarios to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then we began the process that involves things like doing a JSA or a tailgate safety meeting, or what we call a TGSM. And we review the safety concerns and make sure everyone knows what their role is and how we're going to get something done. Obviously, there's a lot of sharp things that you can see in here. And it was amazing what we uncovered when we started pulling items out of the hole. One of my favorite things is that it might seem like we're just cleaning up trash, but we actually had a blast doing it, coming up with ways on how to haul it out. We had a grappling hook that you can see in the right image actually was tying together all the barbed wire and refuse and trying to pull as much up as we possibly could before starting to hand remove select pieces. Then we kind of had a conveyor belt at a certain point as more and more trash got removed. And then we would send a bucket in and start moving it up the hill. As you can see, that slope it's not incredibly steep, but it is very, very loose. And so we wanted to make sure everyone was able to get out if needed, but also so we could still get the trash removed. As that went, I'd say, sum total between all the volunteers that were involved, we speedily moved through the process. And again, it shows from the original picture how important the volunteer aspect is to have warm bodies on board with these projects. Another important part is the biodiversity. What actually lives in these caves? And again, it's not just the groundwater, it's everything that you don't normally see or associate. A lot of times gypsum caves in New Mexico, they're not viewed in the same light in regards to the high guads, where you have giant systems that are world renowned. And so these are kind of like the lesser cousins, but they're equally beautiful in their own way. And in fact, to some degree, outside of bats and colonies, which they do have, there's a very diverse amount of life that lives in them. So I have some samples of what we had there, like rattlesnakes, which being danger noodles, yes, it is not fun to come across them, but at the same time, it's wonderful that they're living in these. You have a lot of pack rats and stuff that get into these caves, but again, they're feeding an ecosystem. The snake eats the rat and vice versa. The rats eat the ticks. There's a lot of nasties involved with gypsum caves, but again, it's the whole viewing it in a holistic view. It's all part of that biome. As you can see in the one picture, I call them yard lobsters, but their names are vinegarones or whip scorpions. In the other image, we have owls. That's a barred owl, but we also have great horned owls. In fact, I've seen both come out of that hole, which is in another area within a gypsum plain in New Mexico outside of Carlsbad. You have bees and hives that find their way into the nooks and crannies of these entrances. As we know, bees are pollinators, right? And just like bats that eat the insects and help farmers out over time and save them lots of money, bees are doing the same. When we live in a desert biome, we want to make sure that all the resources that are available in such a harsh environment have the ability to thrive. Another interesting one that I almost stumbled into was a bobcat. It's very hard to see in that image in the corner because I did not want to disturb it. So I zoomed on it as best as I could. But again, we've come across multiple caves that have had them inhabited, whether it's they're going in there during the winter or not. They're using these caves actively. My favorite two that is it is endemic to the region are tiger salamanders. I've been very fortunate. They're one of my favorite creatures of all time. And I've gotten to see quite a few of them, and they're beautiful. And they're native to New Mexico or Lincoln and Nabaca counties. They're fossorial. They spend much of their lives underground in burrows. If heavy rains do occur in our monsoon seasons that we have, sometimes you will find them at surface as well. And they're both aquatic and terrestrial salamanders, and they eat whatever they can fit in their mouth. Again, think of microplastics, think of trash as it breaks down over time. These type of populations can be affected by it. So it goes again to the holistic method of how we view cave conservation. One of the big things is the aftermath of any cleanup. And why we feel that reward at the end of the day is, you saw the picture that I first started with. This was the end result. We are restoring it and remediating it back to its natural state. That's, part of the big thing with it is when we're reversing or stopping that environmental damage, this is how we can see and assess our impact. It is just a huge difference. I mean, we pulled out a tractor, probably from the 1930s from that. There was an old windmill in there. There was barrels in there. We don't even know what the barrels had in them. Old appliances and barbed wire beyond. I mean, bottles. I even found something as a native St. Louisan who's been living in New Mexico. I somehow found a piece of glass in there from St. Louis, Missouri from like the 30s. I thought that was very fitting, to the situation that we were in. But again, teamwork is the dream work on that. And so part of those partnerships and working with ranchers, it takes time, and our overall goals with the project would be to set up stations that are in a logistical standpoint that we can get something like roll-off bins, or even work with them on creating their own pits that they can be able to use as kind of in situ landfills. Working in the oil field and environmental, I deal with a lot of contamination, and there is techniques that are valuable that we can apply to these situations, such as installing geosynthetic clay liners in a pit to make sure that there's a natural barrier with something like with something like an impermeable layer that works like clay to prevent water and slippage from going down under. Because people are going to find a way to get rid of their trash, we want to work with them in order for them to not put it back in these holes. A lot of these ranchers too inherited this mess. They bought these ranches from someone else. And so, trying to hold them accountable and wagging your finger at them, they might be on board with it already. And if you approach them in such a manner, you're not going to win them over. Ultimately, this is about the caves and not about us and our views on how to get back or stick it to someone. We want to accomplish what's best for the caves. And so with that, we are working on trying to get more and more funding to come up with solutions to these issues. And I welcome anyone that would want to participate in such an activity. If you came down to New Mexico, come and find me and I will make it happen. And so what I'd like to leave to with that is, and we rode the trash chariot off into the sunset. There's the pile with the original trailer that we had and some of the trash that we pulled out. This actually was much higher and had to be bent down by the end of it. There's me being goofy with one of the pieces of trash we found out and some of the spokes from a tractor. We called it the trash chariot. Thanks, Nate, for the picture. But other than that, again, this is a holistic approach. And what we want to do with conservation, as Minori said, is spread it to everyone else. These ideas are not copyrighted to us. This is something that we would wish to see everyone else practice. Because at the end of the day, we all share something in common, and that's our love of caves. And so, any type of work that can be done to protect and conserve what we love is good work. And other than that, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Excellent presentation. Appreciate that. So next up, we have Carrin Rich. She's served as an officer in the Sandia Grotto in a couple positions, and she's going to be talking tonight about cave restoration. Carrin, are you ready?
I sure am. Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. I'm Carrin. I'm based in Albuquerque. I'm going to turn off my camera and share my screen. So I want to get a little bit more granular and talk more specifically about specifically restoration techniques, things that we use in caves. So what is restoration? If cave conservation is about protecting caves from future human impact, cave restoration is about mitigating impact that's already occurred. So it's important to remember that impact can never be undone. We can only lessen or hide its effects and we talk about returning a cave to a more natural looking state. So really we're just approximating perhaps a natural state that the cave once had. A discussion of types of restoration then is also a discussion of types of impact that caves can sustain. So one of the most basic forms of restoration, like we've just heard from Michael, is trash removal. He kind of talked about like the mother lode of trash. When we talk about trash removal, we're talking about taking out things that don't belong in a cave, which sounds really simple, but there's a wide variety of trash that can wind up in caves. We've got your basic pieces of trash here on the floor of an entrance room. Collecting trash like this is especially important in caves that are open to the public and ungated or unmonitored. Grottos sometimes organize regular trash pickup schedules if they have a cave like this in their area. Then we've got bigger trash that you can't simply pick up. This is a tire that was washed into a cave in a drainage during a flash flood here in New Mexico. And it's now wedged between these basalt boulders in the foreground and the ceiling of the cave. It'll take a jigsaw and 2 or 3 people to cut this tire out and remove it from the cave in pieces. Some trash once served a purpose in a cave. This is a marker for a photo monitoring point that is no longer in use. You can see the nail affixing it to the rock has rusted, and both the nail and the tag need to be removed from the cave. Markers and flagging from outdated surveys or old science work can really linger in a cave when the data chain has been broken and no one knows whether they're still in use. Lint is an especially fun form of micro trash to remove. Lint, here filling these bags, is tiny particles that come off of human visitors. Skin cells, hair, dirt from our shoes. It is nasty detritus that is all ours. Lint particularly affects caves with high visitation. These bags of lint were collected from a National Park Service cave, and it took a 6-person team 12 hours to collect this much lint. So it is painstaking work done with tweezers, and it can be pretty hard to find volunteers to do this kind of restoration. Graffiti removal is another type of restoration that caves can need. There are a lot of different techniques for removing graffiti depending on the type of graffiti that you're removing. If it's etched into rock, like this recent signature in gypsum, it needs to be scratched out with a wire brush or here with a Dremel tool. Dremeling may also be necessary to remove insoluble materials like nail polish or glue, which do find their way into caves. Spray paint, here in multiple layers covering this entrance chamber, often needs solvents and a whole lot of elbow grease to remove, but the results of graffiti removal can be really dramatic. This is the same chamber after 40 people contributed hundreds of volunteer hours to effect this transformation. So to deal with some of the graffiti in this chamber, here solvent, an organic biodegradable compound, is applied on paper towels to sections of paint. Once the paint has been soaked and the solvent has weakened it, volunteers can chip it away with dental picks. Here, the same solvent is applied with a cotton tip. This is a very controlled method where the cotton is rolled over the painted surface again and again until all the paint has been lifted. Graffiti removal techniques need to be customized to the type of material that's being removed and the rock surface that the graffiti is on. Sometimes it's impossible to remove graffiti without also removing some of the underlying rock substrate. This bleached out section on a trail to a cave was left by some overly vigorous scrubbing. So charcoal and naturally occurring mineral pigments were mixed with water and applied with a paintbrush to camouflage the damage. So over time, these pigments chemically bond to the rock and become resistant to weathering. And that's true in a cave as well. This is on the surface, but the same holds true for in cave. And that entrance chamber that had been restored used this same set of camouflage techniques after the graffiti was removed. So camouflaging techniques are also needed when it comes to show caves with lighting systems. So here we're not talking about returning a cave to its natural state, but we are talking about the visitor experience. So even the most atmospheric, low impact lighting system comes with electrical cables that are not meant to be part of the visitor experience. And there's a variety of techniques for obscuring unsightly cables like these. You can bury them or trench them in just out of view under the surface. This volunteer has been working from the right side of the screen and is heading toward the left. This is an especially effective technique when your surface has lots of loose material that you can dig your cable into. When you don't have loose material available, like here, where this cable is running over flowstone, you can rock the cable into place. So the cable is still there, as you can see here on the left, the cable's visible, but the part of the cable that's running over the flowstone has been covered with rocks that both hold it in place and obscure it from view. Color matching becomes important here. So it's best to use rocks from nearby areas to get a good color match. If you have to move materials in a cave to create camouflage, you want to use materials that are closest at hand and minimize the distance that you're transporting them through the cave. Another technique you can use when there's not a lot of loose material on a surface is mudding. Here, this paste has been created by mixing loose fill from a nearby area with water, and it's applied to the length of the cable running over this hard surface. Once the cable is covered, dry material is sifted over the top of it to create a color match and blend the work in with the surrounding areas. So the cable is still right here, running right here, but you can't see it anymore. So it's super fun to make things disappear this way with camouflage. And finally, if nothing else can be done with a cable, like here where there's very little loose material and it's on a small area in general, sometimes it's enough to just change the color of the cable. Here, a thin slurry was applied to the cable. You can see here in the foreground that the color of the cable has been changed with this slurry. And the flagging was nudged right up against the cable, not really to hide the cable, but just to minimize its visual impact. So it's a bit of an optical illusion. The cable's there, but you just don't notice it so much. Okay, so what do you do when someone has walked all over a cave and left muddy boot prints on a beautiful flowstone slope like this one? Or when a trail here wasn't marked well and nearby formations have been coated in dust and mud? Well, you wash. And yes, that is a toothbrush. If the area you need to clean is large and without a lot of relief, you might be able to use a larger scrubber like this one here in the middle. But for complex and convoluted areas like this complexity right here, just off of, this is Minori, this is just off of Minori's right hand, you'll need something like a toothbrush or even something as small as a dental pick to get into all of the crevices. Formation washing tools need to be plastic or vinyl so they don't gouge or mark the surface you're cleaning. And you'll need to apply your wash water, not with a bucket, but with a spray bottle. The results of formation washing are really rewarding. Here, the volunteer started at the top up here, and she's cleaned this upper section of this beautiful velvet flowstone. She's working her way down, so you can just imagine the colors that are going to pop when she's able to remove these deposits of mud and these up here. Catchment is important when you're washing flowstone. You don't want your dirty wash water to run down and pool where you're working. So you have to work in small areas and control the effluent by blotting it with a sponge continuously. And you can see that this volunteer has done so because even though she's washed all of this, you don't see any drips or streaks down below. That means she's been real careful catching all of her water with a sponge. So with enough careful, detailed washing, maybe even some tweezing to pick up loose particles like these here, even on a surface this complex, washing can help it to come very clean. Cave pearls are especially fun to clean. They are a tiny formation that can get covered in dust or mud or silt. To clean them, each pearl needs to be taken out of the nest and washed individually. Then all the clean pearls get put back into the nest. So are you getting the sense that restoration is pretty fussy and repetitive? It is. Often an impact that takes only a moment to create takes many, many hours and a lot of fine, detailed work to correct. So I won't go into detail here, but just to give this a mention, pools present a unique challenge for restoration. Their surfaces can easily get loaded with dirt and silt from visitation. And if you're in a show cave, even coins or other trash that gets tossed off of a visitor trail. But to clean a pool, all the water has to be removed and held aside in the cave while the surfaces are scrubbed. And then all the water is returned to the pool. A pool this size might have hundreds of gallons in it. So you can appreciate the feat of moving that much water around and containing it underground. All right, so you know the adage, leave only footprints? Well, we don't even want to do that in a cave. Footprints off trail can really mar the appearance of a cave, whether they're muddy tracks on flowstone like we've seen, or imprints in dirt, sand, or mud. Tracks can be left by previous cavers, previous visitors, but they can also be left by restorers doing restoration work. So we always want to be mindful of our own impact and brush our own tracks out before we leave. That's usually the last step of our restoration. We brush our way backwards out of the work area. And a brush like is shown here on this slide works great for tracks on loose, dry surfaces. Here on the left, this boot print in the middle has been brushed out, and then rocks from the surrounding areas have been placed on top of where it was to blend in what used to be a track. And here, an entire trail has been removed through restoration. On the left, you can see the main trail here on the other side of this flagging. And then this is a spur trail. It was an old science trail that came off of this main trail. So old and obsolete trails are something else that can mar the appearance of a cave. If a trail has been determined to no longer be necessary, we can use camouflaging techniques to remove it. Here first by brushing out the boot prints on the trail and then covering the old trail in rocks from the surrounding areas so that the old trail again matches its environment. The last type of restoration that I'll mention before I hand the presentation back off to Mike is formation repair. So what do you do when you have a forest of broken stalactites, like in this ceiling patch? Or when a whole stalagmite has been broken from its base by someone chopping at it to take it as a souvenir? Mike has special expertise in formation repair, so I'm going to let him take it from here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Carrin. Excellent, excellent presentation. All right, let me share my screen. And let me know when you see it. Able to see it now?
We can see it.
Okay, good. I want to see if it advances because I had problems with advancing before. But anyway, so I'm going to be talking about, I'm Mike Mansur, and I'm the Southwest Region Chair and the San Diego Grotto Chair, and I've been caving since 1968. I started doing restoration work in 1986 at the Carlsbad Caverns Restoration Field Camp, and I got hooked after that. So I've been doing that pretty much ever since, along with the recreational stuff, of course. But I want to talk about how to start projects, the jurisdictional relationships that are very necessary with the government agencies as well as private landowners, the tools and techniques that we have developed, and the documentation needed to get these projects going. Public awareness, which means education for folks that either are cavers or are not cavers. It's pretty important. And funding sources. So I just changed the slide. Did it change okay for you guys?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you. So I'm all set. Okay, so we go on to the next slide. So the Cave Formation Repair Project I started it back on June 2nd, 2018, as just a repair of a formation that I was told was broken. So I consulted my friends Jim Worker and Val Hildreth Worker as to how to go about doing this, because they have expertise in it. I know that back in the 60s, I think Jerry Trout had started doing formation repairs, and then Jim Worker did it, I think, in the 80s, and then kept going, and then Val joined him in the 90s, and they were doing it up until I started this project. In fact, I think they're still doing it as well, but this project began with this formation in Black Cave, and that's me drilling a hole for the stainless steel pin. And then ever since then, we've been getting people involved in the projects, and it's become quite a popular thing. So here's some of the project breakdown so far. So since 2018, we've worked in 14 different caves, covering jurisdictions of the United States Forest Service, the Park Service, the BLM, and privately owned caves. And we've made repairs to date to 484 broken formations. And we've had 72 participants from all over the country actually participate in this project. We've had 77 of the trips to date, and people have traveled from their homes to the cave and back home again, a total of 114,373 miles. So that's dedication by volunteers right there, because they're not compensated. And so far in cave, just in cave volunteer hours worked is 2,113. And so a little bit of history, like I talked about, was in the early years, they tried different methods of adhesives to work on things, including, I guess, Elmer's glue, but they had to start somewhere. And of course, a lot of this stuff failed, and then they tried different products. And so to this day, and now we've, with the NSS Conservation co-chairs, Jim and Val Worker, have come up with a great product from Bueller. And I'll talk about that a little later, but it's called odorless and colorless and not harmful to cave life. Training is very important to do it properly. You don't want to just slob on the adhesive. You want to do it in a delicate way, and a certain steps are needed. Starting a project, you have to first work with the landowners or the managers and do a reconnaissance trip to see if you can find anything that needs to be repaired, and matching formations as well to where they came from. The cave manager and owner contacts are very important. We maintain a very close relationship with the rancher that we have to cross the land to get up to the quads. He likes to hear about the trip reports, and so it's very important to maintain that contact, because you need all these people involved. Do an assessment of the work area, make sure it's a safe environment. You're not going to harm any cave life and harm yourself. And then you can start identifying and matching formations, which some people are very gifted at doing that. Some people can just look at the formation piece and look at the ceiling or floor and find a match right away. So I'm very impressed with a lot of folks who've been able to do that really well. Prepare the formations, which means they have to be cleaned properly and then dried, and then either a stainless steel pin put in through a use of a hammer drill. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. Then you make the repairs, you camouflage the joints so people don't see them when they take a photograph of the area, and properly support them. You might have heard of Galactajack as an invention I made for this purpose. We'll talk about other formations too, but these, it's very necessary to be able to easily put up and take down or support for these stalactites that we repair. So flagging off restored areas so people don't walk back onto them. To either damage the formations again or make tracks in the areas we've had to clean. Proper decon of the clothing and equipment is very important, because you don't want to take anything from the cave to other caves, and also vice versa. Make sure you go in with a clean set of clothing that's not been used anywhere else. It's been, for example, white nose WNS affected. Make sure you have very detailed trip reports that you give either to the landowners or managers, because that's going to guarantee or at least help you get into more projects. If you do it properly, give proper photo credits. When you go into government land, you sign a document called a volunteer service agreement, which then turns over the ownership of those, every photograph you take, to the governing agency. So make sure you give proper credit on those trip reports to the photographs, as well as the photographer themselves. Make sure you give presentations to grottos, the NSS, and general public to educate them as to what was done and to get them maybe involved and try to, I'm very inclusive. I let anybody join this project and come on a trip. And as long as they respect what we do, you know, that'll guarantee them a spot back. So here's some of the tools that we've invented for the project. You heard the stalactijack, but then you can read the rest. I'm not going to read them all. You can see them, but one of the more necessary ones is a Speedio clamp, which actually holds a formation in place while we drill a hole into it for a stainless steel pin. And the Speedio rack, you'll see some photographs of all of these things coming up. So they all have a purpose. And some other things that are very important too are the photo image matching that Todd Roberts developed. That means he takes a photo of the end of the formations to scale, to color, and then matches them, put them on a photographic paper, which then instead of holding one formation up to the ceiling where you're holding it to hundreds of different stubs, you take a photographic piece of paper and then hold that paper up, and you can match things much easier that way. Making an impact map of the broken formations so you can show the cave management, what's been done on each trip. And I made a grotto workstation that I use for training, like I did at the NSS convention this year, to show people how to use these devices inside a classroom before they actually get to the cave. And I'll show you a photo of that later. And some more of the devices. One of the important ones was a stainless steel tube for active formations. So what we were doing is putting solid stainless steel pins made out of cut off the bolts, cut off the heads on them, to put in to strengthen the joints that we use that we epoxy together. However, a lot of those formations are active. So it was Todd and Minori, I believe, that came up with the idea of stainless steel tubing instead of solid stainless steel pins to see if the water would pass through them. We did this in Hidden Cave. You'll see a photograph of it, and it worked like a charm. The water passed through the joint, came out the other end. And so it was a huge win by just some innovation. And I highly value innovation on this project. So I reward the folks with credits for that. So here's the photo image matching technique that Todd Roberts developed. You can see where, if I'll move my cursor, you can see the formation that's wrapped in a black background of foam. He's made this device with a ruler and a counter to scale the formation size. And when he takes a photograph, it as a reference. And so you can see the steps taken there to do that. And then it's put on photographic paper and numbered. So you can take these photographic papers to hold them to the ceiling and then find a match much more quickly than you would holding a single piece. Very clever idea, a very, very good thing to use. And so here's Minori actually holding up a image matching paper. You can see how it works. You can compare the stub with the pieces that are on the paper and then reference them. We have them marked as numbers to go pick it out of the pile. And that has been very useful for us. So here is actually Newt Peterson, the BLM cave specialist, in a forest of stalactijacks that we had in a cave in the Guads. And you can see in the lower left, there's a whole bunch of broken formations that we've actually put together, epoxied, but we haven't located in the ceiling yet. And this is a highly delicate area because you can see how, as we make more and more repairs, they hang down to almost the floor. So you got to thread your way through there. So it's a very delicate thing that we work with. And so here's a photograph of myself and Minori doing a formation repair in Carlsbad Caverns by the Caveman Junction. This was 20 feet in the air. So I had to modify a stalactijack to reach up that high. So that is how we made that repair. And so right to this day, you can walk underneath that and not even know it's there. But several of the Park Service people know where it is because I showed them recently. And so here's the Speedio clamp in use holding information that was broken in two pieces in Virgin Cave. And so it was actually holding it upright so the base would cure. And so we put two stainless steel pins in that as well to make it upright because it's very top heavy. And here's Michael Moffitt, one of our co-presenters that was putting together formation in one of the caves. And then after it was repaired, the joints had been epoxied with stainless steel pins holding the joints together. And that stayed in that Speedio rack for a year till this past trip we went last month. And we actually affixed it to the ceiling, which I don't think I have a photo of that yet, but it's now curing. So hopefully that'll take place, but it was an entire formation. It was all in different pieces. And now we've actually put it back to the ceiling again. And this formation in Spider Cave weighed 54.45 pounds. I say that because I purchased a fish scale so I could weigh these to know what we're dealing with. So the Speedio clamp worked well to hold this huge formation in place while we actually drilled it and prepared it for the trip to the ceiling. This was a formation that was broken off from a stub 8 feet in the air. So this is showing actually a photo of how the Speedio clamp is used in place to drill a hole in the formation. And this is much safer than having one of your participants, teammates, holding that in place with their hands. It's a lot safer, believe me. We've come close a lot of times. So this takes care of the safety issue. And so back to the formation in Spider. So I was faced with a task of try to either make something to stand on or make something that would lift the 54-pound piece to the ceiling. So I invented the Speedio Crane. And so you can see it's made out of PVC and stainless steel and some rope and a sender to help it keep it in places as going upwards. But it was, I had tested it in the gym and it lifted up a 70-pound dumbbell okay. So I knew it'd probably be okay, but we had to disassemble it and take it into the cave that way in pieces. And so that worked out well, which you'll see in a little bit. Here's the Speedio rack, and you can see we had to put a bunch of them together because that's Cave Specialist Jen Foot next to this Speedio rack. And so we have to keep them upright after we glue them together or epoxy them together. And so that's a very useful tool as well. And so I was talking about the use of stainless steel tubes. So this is in Hidden Cave. And so we had to clean off the growth because they were active. This formation was active in 2 places. And so we drilled the pilot holes for the stainless steel tubing, set the stainless steel tubing in, which you'll see on the right side. There's a piece stub sticking up. Then we epoxied it together, being careful not to plug up the stainless steel tube. And we came back about 3 months later and the formation was all wet once again. And it passed through that stainless steel tube. So there's another way that folks can use to repair live formations. And so here's a broken impact map that I had created to show in Cottonwood Cave, this particular room called the Cantina Room. So we surveyed the room and then I drew the impact of all the different broken formations in there. And then I used a green circle around the ones we had repaired. So after that point, we can give that to the cave specialist to show them after each trip what progress is made. And it's a very effective tool to help show the cave owners or managers, what progress we're making, as well as how much damage is left to repair. And so we also use LiDAR, which is used in Fort Stanton Cave Study Project for mapping. We also use that in this cave. And so you can see the sketch that I made of that area. The LiDAR photograph of it looks like that. So it came really close. So that's going to be a 3D development that we want to end up having this used as a photograph of the ceiling, a LiDAR of the ceiling. So we might be able to use computer enhancement to the computer might be able to locate matches based upon this LiDAR. So we're developing that. So we're getting into high-tech stuff here. So important points. So carefully assess the work area because you don't want to just walk into an area that's going to be compromised if you do any repairs there. And if there's any cave life, biota, otherwise that might be compromised, don't start the project. Don't start it if it's dangerous, if it's dangerous to cave biota. If it can't be accomplished without further damage or impact, don't do the repair. Always wear proper PPE. In essence, nitrile gloves and eye protection when handling formations and working with the epoxy, because that's non-toxic. However, it's just like anything else. You can spill vinegar on yourself and get a skin burn. So you don't want to deal with that. So wearing the right PPE is very essential to not contaminate the formations, as well as not get the epoxy on your hands when you're working with it. And use only the epoxy recommended by the NSS Conservation Division, which now currently is a Buehler product. And I have the numbers. I don't think I included them here, the product numbers, but it's a little pricey, but I've had the same gallon of resin and quart of hardener with me for about 4 years now. And it's very effective. It's an archival epoxy that's used in museums. It's clear and odorless. And you might see it when you see formations things in museums that are encased in acrylic. That's what this stuff is. So always work with the governing agencies to acquire guidance and permits. And if a cave is on private land, don't attempt to work without the owner's permission. Training, please don't attempt this cave formation repair process and restoration without proper training, because you could actually do more harm to the cave and the cave life and yourself without proper training. So here's the grotto that I made to use for training purposes for workshops that I just used in the NSS convention. And before we went into Bethlehem Cave the next day, I had all the students work with these devices. You can see the stalactijack, the soda straw clamp, and the horseshoe clip, which actually holds a bacon in place to do a repair that way. The Speedio cup right here, which is on smaller formations. So they got to work with these. When I turned these formations down on my lathe at home. So I'm a woodworker. And so if they drop on the floor, nothing happens. But that was a great way to train folks in the classroom and then take them into a cave and do actual work. And I'm going to be doing it again next year for the convention. So documentation required. So there's a lot of paperwork involved to do this. It has to be done. The voluntary service agreements are very important because they're not only given the permission that your photographs are going to be owned by those governing agencies or the private property or the private landowners, but they also cover you for workman's compensation should you get injured on this project or other volunteer projects. So they're very important that you have that in place. I've got one with a BLM, the Forest Service, and the Park Service. So that way we're covered. Risk management awareness sheets that we use to determine and show folks as they sign them what's involved with risk management, danger to climbing in the cave, maybe rattlesnakes along the way, climbing, rope work. Take a mileage log because we use that as volunteer value to determine per diem hours for like the Forest Service particularly, but all three agencies track that. The cave permits are very important to have in place. You can't go into a cave without a cave permit through the governing agencies. So make sure you follow every piece of information on those when you sign it. The tailgate safety sheet talks about what you're going to be encountering that day. And we turn those in to the Forest Service after each trip along with a cave permit. So you want to make sure people are aware of to make sure they wear gloves when they're handling the epoxy, make sure they know the dangers that could be in the cave. They have to stay on trail and that, there's inherent dangers with caving. The trip reports with photos to the landowner and managers in a timely manner. I really like to get them in there in a few days to those folks because usually I have a trip or 2 trips per month, sometimes 4 trips per month for the cave formation repair project. So I like to get the the trip reports done to them and not hurry, but quickly. So that way I can proceed to the next one. Make sure you give proper photo credits to the governing agencies as well as the person who took the photograph. And also make sure you give cave presentations. I go to a school locally in Albuquerque to give a presentation every year to their science expo to tell them about cave and cave safety and restoration that we do. And if you can, submit articles to local media because that's important to get the public awareness out there to the public, and also submit your articles and your project work to the International Cave and Karst, International Year of Cave and Karst. That's important through George Venny because that gets those projects out there to a larger audience. So that worldwide they can share these different projects and maybe lessons learned. And funding sources. So there's an NSS grant you can get through education or conservation. You have to apply for that and justify its purpose. Donors like the grottos can give donations to the people for the projects. And then out of pocket, which is mostly, in this case, I have done that myself. I've actually purchased t-shirts to give to folks that have the picture of us on the back and the project on the front as a reward for doing 2 or more trips. So there's also other things you can do to reward them too. But anyway, that is pretty much the funding ways of getting money. So for further information, I wrote a book called the Cave Formation Repair Project, which can be found or bought through Speedio Books. And I'm soon to be in the NSX bookstore, I hope. And also Cave Conservation and Restoration in 2006 by Jim and Val Hildreth Worker. Very great resource. And, it explains a lot of this stuff in detail, except not the new devices we've made, but it's a very useful book as well. So wrap up. So we tried to do in this session with the 4 presenters, a comparison of cave conservation and preservation, restoration, cave repair, and sinkhole and karst cleanups. And it's important because the water that we drink in a lot of our areas and aquifers goes through a cave usually, especially in these karst areas. So it's very important to get the education out there to everybody so they know that, don't throw trash into the sinkholes or contaminate water in caves by throwing coins in for like a wishing well. You can't do that stuff. It ends up in the aquifers. And so this is very important to put it into something like the International Year of Caves and Karst so they can distribute that worldwide. So I want to thank the presenters and Deborah Heyer and the NSS for sponsoring this webinar. And just before we go to the questions, I want to also thank some other folks too. So I want to thank Newt Peterson, BLM cave specialist who issues the permits and works with us to get the project work in the caves. Aaron Lynch, Carlsbad Caverns cave specialist for doing the permit work. And Jen Foote, Lincoln National Forest cave specialist who issues the permits as well. And each one of those folks has been on the project, my project here too. So I thank them for all that support. Lois Mano is a longtime supporter of and participant of the restoration work that are done in caves. And all the volunteers that have been involved with projects, not only the Cave Formation Repair Project, but other projects throughout the years, like the lint picking and bat counting. And for my co-presenters, Minori, Carrin, and Michael, for doing an excellent job and researching what we did. And so I had a couple other things to say. Okay, so we have shown you some of the projects that we've spent thousands of volunteer hours working on. We must continue these projects for all caves, which are privately owned or managed by government agencies. If you'd like further information, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information can be found in the NSS directory, or you can email us directly too through the local grottos we belong to. If you do not belong to a grotto or the NSS, please consider joining. You will learn cave saving techniques, network with great people, and get to help on these very important projects. And so thank you all for participating, and we will take questions on the chat right now. So let me stop sharing here. Okay, so I will go to the chat and I'll start going down through it now. Deborah, are you set up to do this, or do you want me to do it?
It's up to you. I don't mind reading, or you can read the questions either.
Why don't you read it? Because I might have to field some of them. So go ahead and read it.
That sounds perfect. Okay. The first question we have is, anyone tried crushed walnut shells with a sandblaster? So this was back with talking about removing graffiti. So I think this is to Carrin.
Yeah, the Sandblaster, we just have not been able to get behind in New Mexico. I know that they have used a Sandblaster really successfully in a few caves in Arizona. Ray Keeler would be your guy to talk to about that. Controlling the effluent from a Sandblaster is an issue. And also in New Mexico, a lot of the places that graffiti crop, and in general as well, I think a lot of the places that graffiti can crop up in a cave are places that, you know, if a human can get to it now to paint it, humans have gotten to it before. And a lot of the, it's frequent, it's common for there to be archaeological sites and archaeological resources underlying graffiti. That was something that we dealt with here in some of the slides that I showed of the graffiti removal. So we have never deemed sandblasting appropriate for our caves here because of the archaeological content. Walnut shells, I have not personally heard of. So if you use them, let us know. I'd be curious to know how they go.
I was part of some of the Arizona projects, and we had to use a lot of tarps and remove the sand, and because we used little glass pieces, and it was such a heavily impacted cave that we felt that that could be done because there was so much. But even with that, it's more that cost benefit analysis of trying to put it back to its natural state as much as possible, but knowing the impact that you're inherently doing some impact. And timing as well, I think, is a real issue. Sandblaster it's quick, it's effective in comparison with what someone with a dental pick can do. So you have to look at the amount of time and the budget that you have available for your project.
It also seems like putting walnut shells or something would be bringing organic material, a natural organic material into the cave, which we don't want to do.
Yeah,
which would be interacting with like the natural biota.
And that actually brings me to kind of the next question. And I might have the person add more to it. So it's from Sarah Truby, and she's talking about the charcoal. When you were adding charcoal, because I mean, some people like when the charcoal has been sterilized, but she was asking because graphite can be a carbon source, so can fungus grow on that eventually?
Yeah, that's a great point. The charcoal, in general, right. We don't want to take charcoal deep into a cave. We don't want to be introducing anything that is organic that can generate further growth. The charcoal that we have used here in this area was used in twilight areas within the cave. So there's already some intermingling with the surface biota. I'm not sure that I would go with charcoal. The same thing also applies really for mineral pigments as well. You know, now that we know that a lot of microbes eat minerals, any kind of organic material or even inorganic material can become a source of food for all kinds of microbial life. So in general, with restoration, we want to bring nothing into the cave. You know, that's why we're not using wooden tools. You know, wooden tools are great for picking at formations because you could, you know, they're small, you can get in there. However, they leave little micro scraps of carbon fibers that can generate microbial growth. So yeah, in general, that's not anything we want to do. Charcoal, I think, was deemed all right at this particular site because we had done an archaeological assessment of the site itself. And there was some ancestral use of charcoal that made it okay, but we did not use charcoal deeper into the cave to conceal any graffiti. I would be cautious about camouflage techniques where you're introducing exogenous materials into the cave. That's why if you're able to do camouflage techniques that just entail mechanically moving around materials that you have there present in the cave, that's by far the best first choice for camo.
And just to kind of add to that, that's why, you know, as Mike was saying, gloves are so important because we're inherently adding, like, as you were showing, that lint. And so even some of these pictures I know that were used were kind of more historic pictures. I know that now we are very much more diligent about making sure we use gloves while we're doing restoration work. This is a really great question, and I know probably a couple of you will be answering this. What cleaning solution is best to clean Flowstone with a toothbrush? If the person who asked that can say,
that's
Jeremiah Johnson.
Is it? I don't know if you can say or not, Jeremiah. It depends what you're working with. Usually, the best solution to use with a toothbrush is elbow grease. And really, when we're cleaning Flowstone deep in a cave, we use water and elbow grease, and that is it. We're not adding any kind of a solution. A solvent, I think, becomes necessary if you have exogenous materials that you need to remove. Other than that, like, elbow grease is your friend.
And his next question is dealing with cave algae. And I know that actually Carlsbad Caverns has been doing research with lamp flora. So I know that that's an ongoing thing people are looking at. And so they asked, will the same method clean cave algae, which is usually what we refer to as lamp flora?
Yeah, are you all talking about the algae, the flora that grow in lighting systems in a cave specifically?
I'm assuming. Jeremiah, do you mind answering to that?
Yeah, we just have some algae that is growing in one part of some flowstone.
As a result of what? Does it get any natural daylight, or is there?
No, it might be due to current lighting that's on it.
Okay, so it's in a cave that has lighting?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem across the country. I am not sure that anyone has come up with a great solution. I don't know if Ellen is still on the call. Ellen spent many years working for Carlsbad dealing with the lighting system there. I don't know if Ellen can speak to this or not, but no, you do need a solvent for that. Like just elbow grease won't do it. You know, you're not going to be able to get all of that removed. I mean, you have to kill the growth in order to prevent it. So then you're starting to look at what materials are safe to bring into the cave. Yes, and light as well. That's a good point from Sarah. Light is like by far the safest thing to use at this point because it doesn't entail adding anything to the cave that's not already there.
So a lot of people are looking into more of preventing lamp and flora. So a lot of the research that's being done is looking at wavelengths of light and seeing which doesn't cause the lamp and flora growth, which is what we refer to as cave algae. So that's one of the people I know. There are several different people who are looking into that. So hopefully we'll have some answers. And because I want to know. Let's see.
Tom Bemis is on here. He's pretty much an expert on that.
Oh, Tom is awesome. Oh, Jeremiah Chapman asks, how can I find cave restoration projects around northern Arkansas? And Michael Moffitt, I think, is going to take that.
Yeah, so I'm actually a Missouri native for St. Louis. And so that was, in fact, I went to school in Springfield, Missouri. So northern Arkansas was an area I spent a whole lot of time on. A lot of Missouri cavers spend their time in Arkansas too with the association with the Ozarks. There was a gentleman by the name of John Beard who did a lot of restoration. And then when I took speleology in college at Missouri State, there was a cave called Breakdown Cave that he was able to actually very much restore to its original state. It was heavily vandalized right outside of Springfield. And so that group I know did work in northern Arkansas, and I think that was through the Missouri Cave and Karst Conservancy, or MCKC. So I have a feeling that they were involved with it. I know that the grottos probably are too. There's quite a few gated caves, and northern Arkansas is actually very rich in them. And so a lot of that is, you know, as cavers and conservancies and conservationists, we kind of go all over the place. And so pooling those resources is a good start. And that's part of why we like to do those presentations, is that we are a resource for you. You know, feel free to reach out to us, because if something isn't in place already, you can take those techniques and try to start your own programs and implement them yourself. I think that's the value of what we are trying to present to everyone here, is that this is not just something that is relegated to, you know, New Mexico or the Southwest region, but it's also something that can be applied elsewhere. And, you know, there is a very large difference, though, between our caves and a lot of the caves that you're seeing in somewhere like Missouri or Arkansas. Our caves are very dry. They're a lot more static environments. Yes, water is involved to some degree, but most of our caves outside of the gypsum areas tend to be hypogene. And so with wet caves or river caves, what I like to call real traditional caves, which is just something different here, you know, there is different techniques. I know that they were using certain implementations for like dental adhesives. I know John Beard worked for 3M as an engineer. And so he applied certain techniques based on his line of work, working for a company that actually designed adhesives, right? So again, it's reaching out to that, or even CRF. I know the Cave Research Foundation has a presence in Arkansas. So those are good starting points. And if you reach out to us after the meeting, I can look into it as well and help try to facilitate that for you.
So yeah, maybe Michael, if you can put your email in the chat, maybe that will be, or any other way, preferred contact. So Brian, who I think had the walnut shell question earlier, he was saying, we have black walnut shells brought in by animals, also some animal remains. I have bats, caves, crickets, cave mice, and bobcats in my cave, so worried about a thinner to break down the paint. And that is a concern about, like, when we're using solvents with paints and having making sure the solvent is something that can be used and won't be harmful to the biota. So that is an ongoing problem. And it's a lot of, as everyone's saying, it's like all these are very selective to your cave project. And so trying things out, kind of doing like little test runs. Sarah Truby says, some folks are using UVC light to try and kill algal growth, and Ellen says about the lamp and flora, of course, it depends on the cave. For example, in Carlsbad Caverns, we were willing to introduce a little bit more in tourist areas because they're not as pristine. But in backcountries, they wouldn't use bleach water solution because you're like, so the, you know, with the idea that you already have some impact. Because especially since they're already using bleach water solution. Let's see. Oh,
I would almost be more inclined if you're concerned about like the chemical impact of using a solvent, I would be inclined to exhaust mechanical methods first. I mean, if it takes getting in there with a dental pick and spending, you know, hundreds of volunteer hours, that might be what it takes to avoid using a solvent.
Any other questions? These have been great. And Michael put his contact info in the chat if you need it. And you feel free also to reach out to me, and I can connect you to any participant at education@caves.org, and I can connect you to anybody and forward your emails. Right now, I'm getting a lot of thanks. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.